I'm going to take Usman Saab's opinion on this also. As an economist, Usman Saab, of course, as far as the government is concerned, their priority is providing for the people in this difficult time. But then, of course, there's a limited cachet to, from which they can dole out anything. No matter how sincere, no matter how much, they may want to. In that kind of a scenario, the difficulty is how and what to prioritize, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. There's no better way to put it that even if you have a positive sentiment and a benevolence towards the people, the pie that you can share is limited. It's a smaller pie and constrained at a time when inflation is very high, at a time when global energy prices remain very high. And so it's very difficult for even the most benevolent of leaders to navigate a difficult situation. And we are not unique in this, because there are many other countries that are struggling with the same sorts of general economic malaise, and everybody is trying to do the best for their people, but the constraints are enormous, the deficits are large, inflation is high, and therefore the binding constraints tend to be so large, and so you cannot do too much even if you want.
Fair enough. Usman Saab, do you agree? Before I go to Abdullah, you think that, convincing whether maybe as far as the performance is concerned, as far as the PML-N-led government at this time, they're going to be concentrating on what they can do as far as economy is concerned. That remains the first priority for government at this time. And then, move on from there, and perhaps, over time, they're also continuously saying that whatever the PTI is agitating against as far as their whatever their grievances are concerned, those can be redressed through the courts. And there is overall opinion that, for example, as far as Peshawar High Court is concerned, their decision as far as the nominated seats are concerned, and those will continue. But in the meantime, the business of the House and business of governance has to continue.
I think you're making a very important fundamental point, that the process of governance still has to continue. This is true. The job of leading a united front that has all of society on board is difficult when the politics becomes acerbic and fractious, as it is now. And when you have an acerbic and fractious climate, then you may have individual rationalities triumph over the collective rationality. What this means is that it may be more rational for you to pursue a more extreme stance, not cooperate with other people within the environment, to pursue a larger portion of a shrinking pie. And by contrast, if the pie were growing, or at least stable, and there was enough to go around, then you would have people perhaps coalesce towards a larger rationality. So individual, group, and then larger group rationalities can often be conflicting. And I think this is the challenge for anybody who assumes the helm of such a large and important country as ours.
Do you think, Abdullah, I think that as far as Usman is concerned, he makes a fair point, leading, directing the government, perhaps, in the right direction as far as economy is concerned. Isn't that also true, Usman Saab? Usman Saab? Ji.
Yes, I think that it's important to have a common steering of the economy. Sometimes I wonder, because we have so many ministries, why do we need such a large architecture? So if you want to go towards SIFC, then you have a lot of redundancies. What I would like, agreeing with all of the speakers, I think the subtext of what they're saying is that we need a smaller and more efficient government. And that it's not so much about the revenue side, because you can't raise taxes, you can't squeeze people like us sitting here. You really have to look at the expenditure. And therefore, if you have expenditure, you should have a much more efficient, technically oriented government. I mean, that uses technological basis to solve problems in society. And therefore, you are a facilitator. The government should be a facilitator for a vibrant private sector. As far as your ideology point from before, I think it is true that there is an ideological as well as a dynastic element to political parties in South Asia. This means that for the larger goals, the larger ambit of economics, they may come from different assumptions, but ultimately ultimately the outcome is to have a more vibrant and thriving and prosperous Pakistan. Therefore, insofar as they can do that within a shrinking pie, within a tough global environment, I think that they should work together to do it. And whether it is SIFC or any other structuring, it has to be on the expenditure side, the serious business of having a facilitative role for the rest of us to rise up as a nation.
Do you see, of course, we have to cut down public spending, all of that, you know, are those factors which already have been highlighted. But the question is, can we achieve those kind of targets that we've set out? Usman, do you see, as far as the dollar is concerned, for example, you know, for a while we've seen it fairly stable. Do you think that stability will continue in your opinion, or do you think it can perhaps, you know, rupee can further strengthen also? What do you see overall in the next couple of months?
It's a fascinating question if you pick only the dollar as the question, because what we're looking at is a rupee, like any other currency, in the foreign exchange market. It's a commodity in a market. So it has a supply and a demand, just like any other commodity does. So what drives the demand of the rupee? It would be our exports. It would be other reasons why investment would come. And then there's the supply of the rupee, which is generated through the banking system, particularly lending to the government. So the supply is very, very high. Because the government is the single borrower now of the banking system, and the relationship between them is very, very close. And at the same time, the demand has been flat. It's not that bad, but it is quite flat. So therefore, you're seeing a rise in the price of the rupee, which means a devaluation of the rupee. And so what we have to look at is ways to generate demand for the rupee, yes, and that includes remittances and exports, but at the same time we have to look carefully at the supply of the rupee, because right now, in the circumstances that have been described by my colleagues very vividly, at the same time you see some sectors are doing very well, uncannily well, and one is the banking sector. It is making profit after profit, quarter after quarter. And this is remarkably unsettling that you would have that, because they're in the business of not lending to you and me. They're in the business of lending to the government at a risk-free rate. And that is, I think, a very big problem. So when you look at that fundamentally, I think that there is always going to be downward pressure on the rupee. Historically, it has gone down by about 7% per year, but it happens in shocks. Like, for example, from 100 to 150 and so on. So what you need is for these shocks to not take place, because it's very difficult for all of us to deal with that. That's why the IMF says, please avoid the managed rate system. Now, we are in a very tight band between 270 and 290, let's say, and the IMF is going to come and talk to us about it soon, but I'm not quite sure why they've rested their hand, but they're going easy on us. But they will come knocking on the door, raising this point about why is this so uncannily stable.
Okay, fair enough. Daniel, I think rather than question why it's so uncannily stable, maybe we're hoping that stability will continue.